Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for attending today's ATMA webinar on a Vietnam market update. It's a pleasure to bring this to you, and thank you very much for making your time for us today. I think most of you know who ATMA is, but just very briefly, we're here to enhance the innovation and development of talent mobility in Asia. We would love to have you as members of our organisation as we try to improve the industry that we're all working in. There's a slide here on a few what might be familiar faces to you of people in the industry who are on our ATMA board. So these are our board members. If you want to reach out to any of them, please do. Debbie, who is with me on the board, is here in the webinar today, so please reach out to us afterwards if you would like to ask anything about ATMA. We have 4 pillars that we work under. Today we're working under education and development, educating you a bit on Vietnam, but we also have ESG and sustainability, advocacy and events and networking as well. So without further ado, we're going to move to today's topic and to today's panelists. So we're all about Vietnam today. So thank you very much to Mike Hibbert, to Dermot Whelan, and to Debbie Bainan for joining us today. They're all going to talk about various parts of what's going on in Vietnam today. And we're going to start off with Dermot, who's going to give us a bit of an update on how things are looking in terms of housing in Vietnam these days. And perhaps, Dermot, you can give everybody a bit of an introduction to yourself before you start. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dermot Whelan. I am currently based, and I have been based in Ho Chi Minh City for coming up for 3 years now. I've been in the moving and relocation industry in the Far East since 1996. So this is my 30th year, heaven forbid, in the business. Like I said, I've been in Vietnam for the last 3 years, and I just wanted to share some of my views on what's been happening in this very dynamic market over the last year or so. And I'll touch on 2 areas: cost of living, just some sort of macro view, and then how that influences expats, and then a little bit more in terms of housing and some of the constraints, etc., that we're seeing in housing supply in Vietnam, again specific to the expatriate sort of communities here. So just some macro figures for you. Excuse me. All of those, to me anyway, suggest that the economy is pretty much in balance. All those figures there are for 2025. So those figures are final now. And they are from reliable sources. Some of them are from the Office of National Statistics in Vietnam. So there might be a political element to some of these statistics, but I have verified them with other sources as well. So headline GDP growth last year just over 8%, which is very, very robust. And the good thing is that a lot of that increased wealth generation seems to have trickled down across all levels of the economy. And you can see that the average salary growth last year was 7.7%. So very much keeping up with sort of GDP growth, which suggests that, the wealth is being spread and not just being pocketed by a certain class of individuals. And then CPI, the Consumer Prices Index, there is a basket of goods in Vietnam that are subsidized by the government, and price controls, etc. But underlying CPI 3.3%, a little bit higher than some Western economies, for example. But then when you look at you offset that against average salary growth of 7.7%, then that seems to be again in balance and in check, and is also the signs of a developing and healthy economy. A certain amount of inflation is actually desirable. It just means the economy is expanding, and like I said, salaries are expanding with it as well. And then to put a sort of expat perspective on this, for the 5th consecutive year, Vietnam has been voted the most affordable country by global expats. This is from Internations. I just take these sort of things with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Some of these industry awards, etc. You've got to wonder about the transparency of of how the award is made, etc. It's a bit like Hanoi Airport winning Asia's best airport, the last 2 or 3 years. Clearly, anybody who's traveled through Hanoi Airport, it pales in comparison to somewhere like Changi or even Bangkok. So make that what you will, but Vietnam is still, in terms of cost of living and affordability, a very attractive destination for expats, no question. Okay, next slide, please, Steve. There's a snapshot of the housing market, Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. It's the two columns on the right that we are sort of predominantly preoccupied with in terms of providing housing solutions to expatriate assignees. In general, the housing market, in terms of rentals, relatively stable. There is a little bit of there is an increasing contrast between Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh. The Hanoi market is a little bit more dynamic. There's more supply coming online. There is a growing expatriate population in Hanoi. It's outpacing the growth in the expatriate population in Ho Chi Minh. If you look at that economic growth figure that I mentioned in the previous slide of 8%, the top 5 provinces that grew the strongest in GDP growth last year in Vietnam are all in the north, and therefore they all surround Hanoi. And of those top 5 provinces, they all grew at 10.5 to 11.5% GDP growth. So there is a stronger growth in the economy in the northern provinces based around Hanoi and Haiphum. Part of that is government directed. Part of that is FDI being pulled out of maturer markets like Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi and going to lower cost destinations as well. But even so, FDI will go to a province like Haiphum or even Ninh Binh, where the factory is or the manufacturing facility is. But because in terms of expatriate engagement, because the services are not there for schools, international medical centres, they're still based in places like Hanoi and to some extent Haiphum. There's still an anchor in Hanoi to as a base for expatriate assignments, even though the work assignment might be out of province, the home assignment is very much still in Hanoi. So there's strong growth in the northern provinces is putting a little bit of pressure on Hanoi in terms of housing costs, but there is much greater supply in Hanoi over Ho Chi Minh. To give you some numbers on that, last year in 2025, Hanoi added 25,000 new housing units. Ho Chi Minh City added 8,600. So I won't go into all the reasons why the housing supply in Ho Chi Minh is fairly static. I mentioned these last year, and really the situation hasn't changed. There's still basically the property market here is still recovering from the enormous financial scandal that broke 2 or 3 years ago with Ms. Trung My Lam. So that's still being played out. And in terms of new housing developments of any sort of scale in Ho Chi Minh, they're basically being frozen. So you've got a fairly static housing supply. You do have an increasing expatriate population, so there are more people chasing the same number of units, but we're not seeing any real sort of disconnect and any real sort of pressure on rents. Certainly from an assignment point of view, an assignee point of view, as a destination service provider, we haven't really had issues finding appropriate housing for people in Ho Chi Minh. There's certainly not demand is not outstripping sort of current supply in that regard. Okay.
Is there any
Steve,
challenges? Any challenges, Dermot, in the sort of the the high end in terms of larger properties for 4 bedrooms and houses? Is that a challenging area still?
Right. So in Hanoi, there's more and more. There's more variety of housing stock coming online. So they're addressing that issue. There's more choice. In Ho Chi Minh, then 4-bedroom apartments are relatively limited. They are essentially the penthouse units of a condominium unit. So they're, by definition, they're limited in supply. And then in terms of villas, then there's no new villa developments. I mean, there's been no noticeable new development launched in Ho Chi Minh City that would be of interest to foreigners that's come online in the last 2 to 3 years, certainly since I've been here. There are some D1 properties which could come online this year, but they're luxury apartment units. A lot of them, they seem to be attracting foreign investors, of course, and obviously wealthy local people, but they're more as an investment vehicle rather than a serious housing option. So Ho Chi Minh, yes, the same constraints and restrictions that applied last year apply this year. There's been no meaningful change of any note, I can say, in terms of the Ho Chi Minh housing market. All right. And then lastly, just some other points on housing. If you look at the bottom 2 tiles there, Ho Chi Minh, there are supply constraints. We saw about a 6 to 8% increase in rents. Some of that is partly due, I think, to the depreciation in the VND, in the Vietnamese dong that's happened in 2025. It's only been a 3% depreciation, but in general, when you're, a realtor, they will quote a housing, a rental cost in US dollars, but then when the tenancy agreement is signed, the rent then gets converted into VND and in general paid in VND. So what I'm not aware of is of any landlord sort of pocket, giving back the difference. I think they're gaining from the depreciation in the currency, and they're not dropping the US dollar asking price for a rental. I don't think that's been going on. But what has been going on last year is that the government now cracking down. They're trying to increase their tax take. There's an awful lot of leakages in this economy in terms of tax avoidance and flat out tax evasion. With the ongoing sort of digitization of services, government services, and just the digitization of information, then the government are now more and more data and more tools that they can use to increase their tax take. And in terms of housing, then what used to happen was if it was a private landlord, which most of the properties are still private landlords, they would quote you the rent and it would exclude tax and also exclude management fees if it was a condominium. And basically the renter had the choice whether they wanted to pay the tax and therefore the rent would increase by 10% to cover for the tax or VAT. That is now becoming less and less of an option. And landlords now are self-reporting, or the government certainly is able to identify landlords and rental income and rental properties. And now there's much stricter and more effective enforcement of the imposition of personal income tax or property tax on a rental income. So that will inflate, I think, rents a little bit as well through 2026. As landlords now they've got no choice. They have to report the rental income, so the asking rent will increase to reflect the increase in tax that is being paid by the landlord as well. Ultimately, the tenant will pay the tax, not the landlord. So there will be some pressure on rents. I think they will go up this year, and maybe even more than the 6 to 8% that we saw last year.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dermot.
All right.
That's very comprehensive. I'm now going to move across to Debbie, who is going to take us through visa and immigration in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So thank you, Debbie, for joining us today, and please give us your introduction as you start off.
Hi, my name is Debbie Bynon, and I'm the Director of Immigration Services for the Asia Pacific region for Crown Worldwide. I've spent my whole career working within immigration. I'm currently based in Singapore, and I've been doing the current role that I have now for Crown coming up to nearly 11 years. So lots changing. So just really a quick highlight on some of the major changes that have happened on the immigration side. On the 7th of August 2025, a new decree 219/2025, was introduced, which essentially provided a complete overhaul of and a comprehensive reform of the labour management. It replaced the earlier decrees 70/2023 and 152/2020. And really the shift is enforcement from more centralized issuing process to a local model, with faster and hopefully more transparent processing, but linked to more stricter compliance. So essentially, there is now a single step application and authorization process. The labour demand approval and the work permit applications are all now completed in one form. Decisions are required within 10 days. And if there's going to be a refusal, there has to be a written notice of a refusal within 3 days. Questions about whether or not that is actually being adhered to, the answer is more generally yes, it is. But the way the authorities are getting around it is that if they have a straightforward application, the decision will be made. If they're going to refuse it, the decision will be made. But if they want more documentation or they want to see additional information, they then pause that date, that time. So until such time as that additional information is requested and then provided, that timeline is staying in one place. So actually it can be longer than 10 days. It can be significantly longer than 10 days. But in general, the timeline is working very, very well. Work permits are now issued by provincial people's committees, leading to more local inspection, audit, and also stricter monitoring. So that's sorry, Steve, can you just go back a second? Also, the changes have redefined experts and technical workers with specific additional criteria. So a new definition in Decree 219 for an expert is someone needs to have a bachelor's degree plus 2 years worth of experience. For specific sectors like tech, like innovation, digital transformation, it's a degree plus 1 year. For technical workers, you need to be evidenced in formal training or have at least 3 to 5 years documented experience. There's also been a change and an expansion in the work permit exemptions. So now it's increased from 9 to 15. Intercompany transferees have been brought into the exemption side. So again, there have been some changes to try and make things a little bit more straightforward. Steve, you can now move to the next slide, please. One important thing that's really happening now is digitization. What is happening in Vietnam, which is what's happening in a lot of other locations, is that with the mandatory electronic submission of both labour and immigration data, they are being linked. So there is a lot of inconsistency that is immediately being detected. So essentially, work permits, visas, TRCs, police, residence data are now all interlinked. That means that if there's an inconsistency in the job title, an employer name, or work location, it's being automatically flagged. And that is also then leading to increased penalties. From the 15th of December last year, an overstay fine has actually been increased to 40 million Vietnamese dong. And if you've got a work permit and a TRC mismatch, or people are working when their documentation is not actually approved, the authorities are taking action on that. So the reality is there are a lot of fines taking place now in relation to non-compliance. So I think an executive takeaway from the immigration space at the moment is Vietnam has just not simply changed the rules in the last 12 months. It's fundamentally changed its enforcement policy. There are clearer rules, things are clearer, more transparent, things are being done a little bit more quickly, the processing is faster. But now there is virtually zero tolerance for what were perhaps informal practices in the past. And exemptions do not mean low risk. So there is either an exemption or there isn't. But I think it's very, very important to understand that there's increased on-site inspections and increased employer liability. And with the matching of data across different government departments, a lot of inconsistencies are being flagged automatically. And I think it's important to highlight that.
Thank you, Debbie. What would you say from start to finish right now, how long should people, expect to need, or, how long do they need to wait to finalize their, immigration so that they can live and work in Vietnam these days?
Well, I think the reality is you have to be very well prepared, because a lot of the documentation that's required still needs legalization, still needs translation. So if you prepare all of that documentation ahead of time, the reality is that 10-day processing period is being adhered to by the provisional authorities. But clearly, if the authorities are not happy that they have everything in its right order, then it's going to take longer. So the reality is prepare well, be very, very clear about what's required, get the legalizations, get the translations done ahead, police clearances, get them all done before you're ready to submit. And you can have that approval quite quickly. Otherwise, it can take a few weeks. It can even stretch into months.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for your insight. There may be some questions later on. But thank you for now. We'll move on to Mike. So thank you for joining us today, Mike. And Mike's going to talk to us about the school situation in Vietnam today. So Mike, please do introduce yourself to everybody as well as you start off. Thank you.
Hello, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Hebert. I'm the Regional Strategic Partnerships and Business Development Manager for Cognita Schools in Asia, focusing specifically on the Vietnamese market. So today we'll cover a little bit of the situation in schools in Vietnam as of 2026, and what parents should be expecting and relocation partners expecting of what is to offer in the education sector. So since 2019, we've seen, similar to housing, similar to GDP, Vietnam continues to expand its school offering, both from international schools and bilingual schools. Since 2019, we've seen around 42% more schools entering mostly Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, and a growth in students of around 30%. So yeah, there's a lot more school spaces available pre-COVID than or post-COVID than there was pre-COVID for a little bit less students. So overall, we're seeing that the bilingual market is really scaling quickly. These are schools that follow the Vietnamese curriculum, the Ministry of Education curriculum, but also have English instruction to a percentage that ranges between 50 to 70%. 50 to 70% would be Vietnamese, and the rest would be taught in English. And so these schools are offering great facilities and usually at a lower price point, but are usually reserved for families, even can be international families, but where the children do speak some good level of Vietnamese to start off. In terms of the international schools, we are seeing that Hanoi is having a lot more new schools opening versus Ho Chi Minh City, and I think it follows kind of Dermot's point on housing. Projects have been getting approvals in the north faster than in the south, and because of housing projects also being developed further in the north, then schools are to follow, not too far behind. This a little bit different in Ho Chi Minh City. We've seen a few cases of schools closing over the last 5 years, or being acquired by larger groups. And we've also heard that some of the schools expected to launch in 2025 were pushed to 2026 and now have been pushed to August 2027. So a little bit slower in terms of growth for schools in Ho Chi Minh City. In terms of expat, I think, yes, expat market has grown. Hanoi, we see it quite a bit. I work with agents in the region, in Korea, Japan, and when I speak with them, they're saying about 70, for every 10 students coming into Vietnam, about 10 are going to Hanoi and 3 to Ho Chi Minh City. And that's for the Korean and Japanese markets. That said, there's still a large Korean and Japanese population residing in Ho Chi Minh City, and I would consider in terms of long-term expats, Ho Chi Minh City still has a larger percentage of these types of families. Next slide.
Okay.
So in terms of school counts, you can see here that Ho Chi Minh City still has more international schools overall, and a larger percentage of bilingual schools, and more opening and growth of the bilingual market, I think, is pushing quite quickly in Ho Chi Minh City. In terms of prices, it's actually, when I first started in education, Ho Chi Minh City was above, but I think the GDP growth in the north over the last 4 or 5 years, we're starting to see Hanoi average for grade 6, tuition prices pushing higher on average. But there are a few schools in Ho Chi Minh City that are still the most expensive tuition prices across the country. I think in terms of consolidation, the fourth point there, it's something to note. Large groups such as Cognita, Noranglia, Taylor's, Inspired Education have been expanding in Vietnam, and eQuest is a local group that continues to expand as well. We are starting to see other education players who may have been in the preschool market or in the university market also opening K-12 schools, or vice versa. K-12 schools opening preschools or moving into vocational or university offerings. Outside of that, I think really the markets we have seen on my side is a growth in European trends. So European families are coming to Vietnam faster than North American. That's just for this year, but I think it's a result of the global geopolitical issues we're currently facing. And in terms of, even if we say North American, US passport holders entering our schools, they are not necessarily coming from the US. They're moving from other Asian destinations into Vietnam. So whether China, Korea, Singapore, moving towards Vietnam. So something interesting to know.
Okay, thank you.
And final, I think there's one more slide. So I think this is more for relocation partners or families to consider. These are just 5 areas I think that are worth looking at if you're gonna re-entering the schools in Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi. So the programs that are offered are similar to any other global markets. IB and British curriculum tend to be the leaders in terms of what are the offerings in the market. The bilingual market has grown quite fast. In terms of admissions and what you should be, what type of checklist expat should be looking at when coming into Vietnam is really around admissions timing, and how many spaces are available in those schools that you're applying to. What kind of language support is available, especially if you're moving families of Korean, Japanese, Taiwanese language proficiency into Vietnam. Each school has different standards and assessment, so it's good to ask about those aspects. Safeguarding to me is always a big one that if you're looking to differentiate between top schools and maybe schools that appear well online, but you should maybe be a bit more careful on is around safeguarding, how they support students, how they handle safeguarding cases. And that's an important one, especially around, and I think Debbie touched on it, but around work permits and who's teaching. The top schools will follow the law very closely. And some of I don't want to say more dubious, but maybe schools that operated in the past a little between the lines, they're getting a lot more issues with government and getting teacher qualifications in order to get their work permit. So something to note is just the teacher quality and experience and history of the schools being able to bring in top ranked teachers. The visa aspects, there's only one thing I would add is that there are some schools, like our school at Ishmik International School of Ho Chi Minh City. There are some schools now able to offer school-sponsored visas for students under the age of 18. And that is quite interesting for some companies who are not providing dependent visas for children coming into Vietnam. So if you do have companies they will sponsor the employee but not the dependents, there are ways to collaborate with some schools on having the school offer a sponsorship letter. Other than that, I think there's some little changes around visa exempt and coming in on a tourist visa for some countries. But yeah, overall, that's a good highlight of Vietnam and the education market we're at today.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that good update on the education situation there in Vietnam. We're coming towards the end of our presentation now, so if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to reach out in the webinar chat and ask any questions of our panelists. I put up a few topics here, just talking about the sort of global mobility landscape in general, and I'm going to pick up on a few of these topics very shortly. But if you do have any questions, please do let us know. I did have a question for you, Debbie, in terms of sort of immigration processes between Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, which were the main two sort of cities that have come up today. Is there a big difference in sort of process and that sort of thing there between those cities currently?
The provincial authorities do work differently in the different locations, yes. But the fact that they've now moved to the provincial guideline and the decree is covering the whole country, the differentials are not quite as obvious. But from the perspective of documentation and the review of documentation, clearly one provincial authority might look at something and say, okay, that's fine, whereas another one may say, I want to see some more documentation. Right. But generally, things are all now more streamlined under that new decree. But yes, I think you do need to be aware that each of the provincial authorities, you got Binh Duong as well, they do all work differently, but overall, generally the standards are very similar.
Okay, thank you for that. And maybe Dermot or Mike, you could comment on this, but just in terms of safety, in general, being out in public and sort of crime rates and that sort of thing. Do you feel comfortable when you're out in the evenings and that sort of thing? Can you just sort of make a comment on sort of safety in Vietnam as of today?
I've lived here for 10 years, I'd say I've always felt very, very safe. My wife, often also out for dinner with her friends, walking at night in Ho Chi Minh City, I would say is one of the safest places she feels. I know there was a survey globally that Vietnam ranked number 2 globally for the in terms of safety for major crimes. There are some cases of still phone snatching or small uh, pickpocketing that do exist, but I think those cases have come down quite a bit over the years. And Vietnam continues, I think, to enforce quite strictly any type of small petty crimes against foreigners, especially in order to protect their record in terms of being a good tourism destination.
Okay, great, thanks. And Dermot, do you have
Um,
anything to comment there?
No, I totally agree with Mike. Same here, and same for my wife as well. I think she's never felt unsafe in this country, other than from traffic and motorcycles and things like that. But
Right.
in terms of footpath
Just
crime,
on the topic of
that's
traffic and with what's going on in the Middle East right now, is Vietnam starting to feel the effects of tightening up of supply of gasoline and things like that?
yeah. So in terms of in the airline industry, the Civil Aviation Authority announced back in earlier in March that they informed the airlines, the carriers here, all of them, foreign and local, to expect changes in their scheduling and reduction in number of flights due to a shortage of jet aviation or aviation fuel. Vietnam imports 70% of its aviation fuel needs. Most of that comes from China and Thailand, and both those countries banned export of aviation fuel in March. So yeah, there will be there's that to navigate, and obviously the cost of flights has gone up, region wide, maybe even globally. And in terms of sort of domestic transportation, then there is a fuel subsidy. Vietnam is an oil and gas producer in its own right. The government did increase the fuel subsidy in March, so I don't think there's been a big change in the price of fuel at the pump. How long they're able to continue that remains to be seen. But at the moment,
there's not lines outside the gasoline stands or anything like that right now.
No, not right now, and I'm not aware of the sort of rationing that Debbie mentioned prior to the call. In what the Thais are doing, a 500 baht limit on a petrol purchase, that hasn't come into effect here yet.
Okay, good to know.
I have a question for Mike, actually, Steve.
Okay, yep, go ahead.
Schools are big employers of foreigners. So, Mike, I hope it's not a sensitive question, but are you aware of any sort of issues that your organisation faced in terms of getting work permits with all the changes that have gone on? Some, that Debbie mentioned. Has there been any sort of difficulties with the schools in terms of employing professional teachers?
On our level, no.
Right.
We have, I think 3 years ago, 3-4 years ago, there was a big change around teachers and education certificates, university certificates, and that at that time there was a big change in some of our locally hired expat teachers. We did have a changeover at that time. In terms of now, it's just, I think, a little bit more clear and clarity on how to process and what types of teachers we can bring in. So we're not facing that much of an issue. But speaking on behalf of some of my friends who run language schools in Vietnam, they've had a lot of hard time with changes in education practices or labor law practices in hiring the what you would call traditional EAL teachers that we find in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. We do have one question that's come in from Parvina from DSP Relocation in Malaysia. So thank you for your question, Parvina. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Could you please advise on the actual reason why the landlord is unable to transfer the deposit back to a foreign bank account? This has been an obstacle for our expats at the end of their leases. What would your advice be, and how can we best manage this situation? So, DS, this is right in your alley there, Dermot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a stress point. So it all goes back to the anti-money laundering, regulations, and I'll say this bluntly, the huge amount of corruption that's been going on in the past, however many number of years. So very, strong regulations governing foreign exchange. Bringing money in is a lot easier than sending money out. But it ultimately falls with the banks, and the banks' implementation and interpretation and requirements from the person who wants to make the remittance. It varies from bank to bank, and it varies from branch to branch, and it varies from city to city. The general rule of thumb is if as long as you can demonstrate source of funds and purpose of funds, then the bank should allow the transaction to go ahead. So if we're talking about the return of a security deposit that was paid initially, that was paid from overseas into the landlord's account, and then at the end of the tenancy agreement, the landlord needs to return it back to the same account that it was remitted from. So you would think that as long as that's reflected in the tenancy agreement or some addendum to the tenancy agreement where it clearly states that the deposit and possibly even the rent will be paid by this organization located in this place, and at the end of the tenancy, the security deposit needs to be returned to this organization in this place. You would. That's what you're required to do in terms of satisfying the anti-money laundering regulations. But then what the banks, when you go to the bank, the landlord goes to the bank and he goes to the counter, and then he's faced with a bank employee. Then it starts getting pretty sort of unpredictable and random in terms of the requirements that bank officer will ask the landlord to provide in terms of documentation trail and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very, I can't give you any hard and fast advice, I'm afraid. It varies from transaction to transaction, bank to bank, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, having the reliable paper trail on the way in when the money's sent in will help in terms of getting that money repatriated on the way out. But that's the only sort of general advice I can give you, because it's pretty random, and it is a source of frustration and irritation, and it's taking up a lot of time, a lot of people's time. We're experiencing it with some of the assignees.
From the owner's point of view, they know how cumbersome this process is to get money out of the country, so they're just not willing to spend their time on it, right? They want to refund.
No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't say. Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I think from my experience, that the landlords are willing to help. They will go to the bank. It's the difficulties are faced at the bank, and it varies from bank to bank, bank officer to bank officer, location to location. That you're never given the same reason. So it's a source of frustration. Certainly.
Definitely, if those deposits can be refunded internally to a bank account within Vietnam,
that is a solution. Yeah, that is a solution.
And then close up your bank account and take that money with you going home, whether you send it home or whether you take it,
yes,
with you in cash.
But obviously, when you've got third parties, RMCs, and it's a corporate lease, etc., they're paying on behalf of their corporate client, then refunding that money to the assignee, that presents its own set of challenges. Right. So et cetera, et cetera. There's no easy solution, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your answer to that question. If there are other questions, please do let us know. Probably got a couple of minutes here to go. I'm just looking at a couple of these sort of trends in the global mobility landscape. Just wondering, how some of these might apply to Vietnam. Just wondering, what types of expats are we mainly seeing coming into Vietnam? Is there a lot of, would you say there's a lot of localization right now, or is the bulk of the expats that are coming into location that Dermot, you're handling, or Mike, you're arranging schools for, or Debbie, you're getting a visa for. Are they more likely to be a traditional sort of assignment right now, where they're there for 2 or 3 years and to go home, or are you starting to see more permanent sort of transfers, maybe other expats from around the region coming to live for on a permanent sort of assignment? What are we seeing there these days?
I don't know if Dermot or myself, I can answer, or.
Yeah, so Mike, if you
No,
go ahead, I think Debbie had some comments
please,
there.
Mike.
Sorry, I was talking to myself. I was on mute. Sorry. I was saying from the immigration perspective, we are still seeing the traditional kind of assignment. I think that's as much about helping satisfy the immigration rules and the requirements to get the work permit in the TRC rather than anything else. If you're going through local hires and local contracts, it can be a little bit more complicated. So we are still seeing clients moving assignees, especially from the immigration perspective, on assignment, because that is the easier way to get the work permit.
Okay. And Mike, you.
I was going to say there's 3 kind of highlights that I'm seeing on this one is the Asian repats, so Vietnamese American or Vietnamese Canadian or in Europe. This trend continues to, I think, to grow as Vietnam from a living aspect improves, but also from an economy or maybe the uncertainty in other economies is kind of leading to that. In terms of expats the ones who maybe are not applying for moving or immigration support, there is kind of a big trend in central Vietnam and Da Nang around digital nomads working in Vietnam, earning income outside of Vietnam, but living and doing 90-day tourist visas around Vietnam, which is kind of outside of our scope. And then when it comes to families and the corporates that we're talking to, one trend that our schools are quite worried about is, as you know, Vietnam education is one of the most expensive education markets versus the average cost of living of everything else in Vietnam. And so what we're seeing on our corporate partners is they're saying we're either going to bring in expats who are their kids are older, they're for university, or we're bringing in singles or very young families into Vietnam. So we're not seeing the same numbers of applications into our schools that we used to see for families of 2, 3 children in primary or grade 6 ages, but more towards either a lot younger children or families who are simply have no kids or outside of K to 12 age range.
Okay. Thank you. That's interesting. Dermot, did you have anything?
No, that is interesting. The only other thing I'd add was that we're seeing an increasing number of expatriates in the digital and sort of IT sector coming in. So certain, I won't mention company names, but there's I think that's a growing sort of cohort of assignees, and they tend to be Gen Zers, millennials, people under 30. Not digital nomads. They're here on 1 year or 2 year assignments, but there's a growing number of those, certainly in Ho Chi Minh City, in the sort of IT sector.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think I'm going to close things up there. Just looking to see if we have any other questions that have come in. Just bear with me for a second. We do also have a conference, our annual conference that we'll be running in Singapore. Please note the date down, the 19th of November, 2026. So we look forward to seeing you all there. That will be in person in Singapore, or you can also apply. You can also join we will be having a virtual part to the conference as well. So virtual participation will also be possible. I do see right at the end here, we've got one last question. Would you like to comment about Chinese expats relocation to Vietnam. Anyone want to have any insights into Chinese expats relocations into Vietnam?
I
Is that
think we
increasing?
generally, sorry, just from my perspective, I think we are generally seeing a lot of outbound movement from China. The reality is the post-COVID, the actual movement back into China from expatriates didn't really pick up as well as perhaps people expected. And we are seeing a lot of inquiries from Chinese companies and a lot of movement essentially outbound from China. Coming back to what's being said, obviously a lot of it is very much linked towards the EV market and anything that's really associated with cars and EVs and the supply chains. But there is a lot of outbound movement from China into the whole region. Thailand, Vietnam, to quite high countries where you are seeing a lot of movement, definitely.
Right. Anybody else? Any comments on Chinese expats? Mike, I don't know what you're seeing in your schools.
It's an area we would love to see more growth in. We haven't seen families really relocating. We've spoken to the Chinese Business Association in Ho Chi Minh City, and they're saying there are a lot of Chinese expats moving or wanting to move to Vietnam, but we haven't seen the families following yet.
Yeah, the families stay in China primarily because of schooling considerations. That's my opinion. Footwear is Vietnam is still it's a global leader in footwear manufacture, and a lot of the factories are either Taiwanese owners or southern China. That sort of Dongguan, Guangdong province sort of factory base, which is part of it's migrated to Vietnam. So we've helped relatively quite a lot of the Chinese assignees move into Vietnam, both in the north and around sort of Ho Chi Minh and the southern provinces where the factories are located. Without exception, the family stays in China because of schooling considerations. The Vietnamese government will not allow a Chinese curriculum secondary school in Vietnam ever, I don't think. So there's one, as you know, Mike, there's one Mandarin kindergarten school opened up in Tao Dien where we are. There is an increasing number of mainland Chinese expatriates in Ho Chi Minh City for sure. Their demographic is on the younger side, let's put it that way. But schooling is a big barrier to to Chinese expatriate assignment considerations.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of our webinar and update on Vietnam today. So thank you very much to Dermot, to Debbie, to Mike for all of your time today, and for everybody who's attended the session. The recording also will be sent out to all participants once we have edited things up over the next couple of days. So thank you very much, everybody. Wishing you a great evening, great Thursday evening, Tuesday evening, I should say. And we'll see you at the next webinar and country update from ATMA. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.